Something I've noticed about the way people with privileged bodies relate to body positivity is that they see how a person feels about their body and a person having negative feelings about their body as being equally bad to how someone's body is treated in society. I think a good neutral example of this is like large boobs versus small boobs. People with smaller boobs often say they feel like it's not as good as having big boobs, but the reality in our society is that people with small boobs have privileges that people with large boobs don't. It's much harder to find things that fit, and you have to pay a lot more money for things, and all clothing is made for women with smaller breasts in mind because it's made for thin women. Women with larger breasts are also usually labeled as like overly sexual as well.
Okay, so this comparison makes absolutely no sense. Like absolutely none. So she said that thin or privileged people relate to the world like people with big boobs because they are both society's standard. And being fat and having small boobs is not privileged. But she says that it's actually harder to have big boobs because it's hard to find clothing, so people with big boobs are actually less privileged than people with smaller boobs. So if we follow this logic to its final conclusion, fat people are actually more privileged than thin people even though they are not society's standard. I didn't say it, she did. And making this diagram hurt my head, so let's move on.
Every time I hear someone recommend a diet of 1,200 calories, I'm reminded of the Minnesota starvation experiment. In 1945, the University of Minnesota did a study on the long-term effects of starvation. Participants were given a diet of 1,500 calories for 24 weeks. It's important to note that these people were chosen because they were happy and healthy before this study. During the study, they became depressed, socially isolated, obsessed with food, and one subject even cut off 3 of his fingers. And that's just the psychological effects. It also had a huge list of physical problems that it caused too, to things like metabolism and heart rate. Those issues did not go away when the study ended. They had lasting mental and physical effects from this study. Next time someone recommends you eat 1,200 calories, just know that it is not near enough, and it is not for your best interest.
So this will be a long explanation, so bear with me. I have seen many fat activists cite the Minnesota starvation experiment as the reason why diets don't work, or are even dangerous. First of all, in the experiment, which was in 1945, the participants were not given 1,200 calories a day, it was 1,600 calories, and I saw one source that says it was as high as 1,800 calories a day. Second, as she stated, the diet was given to people who were at what was considered an ideal weight. The men were then put on a restrictive diet for 6 months. And not only that, these men were required to walk 22 miles a week, or about 3 miles a day, along with other lab tasks. It is true that in the end, many of the men that finished the experiment had major mental and physical problems long after the experiment ended. The men had lost about 25% of their body weight, which for context, is like going from 160 pounds to 120 pounds, and mind you, these men were at a healthy weight to start. But you cannot compare any diet by 2021 definitions to the Minnesota starvation experiment. These men were literally starved. There are also countless other variables, like the fact that these were all men, who generally need more calories, and all the participants ate a specific wartime diet which only included foods like potatoes, turnips, and macaroni, that could affect the outcome of this experiment. Even though for an individual in modern times, a 1,200 or even 1,500 calorie diet may not be healthy for them, citing the outcome of this experiment to reinforce the idea that anyone in 2021 restricting their food could result in the same outcome is dishonest. So either you didn't read the parameters of the experiment, you aren't good at understanding scientific studies, or you cited this experiment because you count on your audience never actually looking it up for themselves. No matter what the answer is, it is highly disingenuous to cite the Minnesota starvation experiment as a reason why all restrictive diets don't work or are dangerous.
Babes, you know diets don't work. You know they don't because you yourself just said every time I diet, I gain more back. But you may not understand why that's the case. So let's talk about the efficacy of diets right quick because they don't work and they're bullshit. Sorry. First things first, we have known that diets don't work forever. I mean, forever, okay? In 2007, UCLA published a landmark study that showed at least 1/3 to 2/3 of people who lose weight via diets will gain back more weight than they lost within the first 4 to 5 years. That number skyrockets after 5 years. This research has been reconfirmed multiple times in the past 15 years. In fact, a researcher named Kevin D. Hall in 2016 published research specifically on The Biggest Loser, winners and contestants. You guys remember that piece of shit show. And what he found was that almost all of them weighed close to, more than, or at their starting weight from the show. Now, why is that? Because diets don't work. They're not efficacious. Efficacy is just a fancy way of saying, does this thing produce the intended or desired outcome? They don't work. I always liken this to an asthma treatment. Asthma is a really good thing most people understand. If I went to the FDA with my new asthma treatment and said, okay, it works 10% of the time, but in 5 years, everyone's asthma will be worse. Why would the FDA approve that? Why would they be like, okay, but that's how diets work?
So let me tell you why that was a bad analogy. A drug to help with asthma must have a very specific chemical makeup for it to be sent to and approved by the FDA. A diet is a very non-specific term that we all use with various meanings and types. A more accurate comparison would be sending the FDA a report that says, herbs help with asthma. The FDA would, rightfully, send back a statement asking, which herbs? And the drug would obviously not be approved. Diets have the same vague meaning, so it's a bad analogy. And this line of thinking can be extended to most scientific studies on dieting, since most of them are surveys that only ask people if they are on a diet. Not the specifics of the diet to then be able to compare the efficacy of each diet.
They work just like that. They don't work, and then they make you gain all the weight back. Now, why is that? There's a couple prevailing theories. There's a lot of theories, but one is that if you restrict food, your body's basal metabolic rate, which is just what your body needs in order to survive and thrive, it readjusts itself because it feels like, oh shit, we're going to get less food, so let me adjust myself to survive. Your body's number one goal in life is to survive. And Kevin D. Hall found this in his research with The Biggest Losers, that their BMRs were super duper low even years after getting off the show. So even just being awake, being alive, they weren't burning as many calories as another person the same size as them. Also, there's the thing about survival mode and all that, but there's a lot of different research on that. Anyway.
I'm glad she brought up The Biggest Loser, considering we were just talking about the Minnesota starvation experiment. If you ever look up the conditions that the people on The Biggest Loser go through, it's hell. It's absolute hell. They are given very little food, and as you can see from the image above, and they work out constantly. This setup is as close as you can get to the conditions in the Minnesota starvation experiment in modern times. It is not healthy, of course. So some people will have poor outcomes from going through such an extreme beat down on their bodies. But it is also an extreme. You can't generalize all diets to the one on The Biggest Loser.
So instead of thinking about how to lose weight, as a chronic lifelong dieter, I shifted my mindset to how do I repair my relationship with food so this is not on my mind for the rest of my life. And that included me leaning into intuitive eating, realizing I had an eating disorder. I am recovering from BD. And also realizing that not everybody's meant to be thin. Bodies are different. All bodies are different, you guys. So everybody's meant to be and look different. Everybody's valid. And think about your health holistically instead of just a number on the scale. Sorry.
I'm glad you have developed a better relationship to food and are recovering. Congrats.
Okay, I had to take a couple days to, take a break from answering these because, y'all are a lot. But, the reason people see so many positive changes sometimes when they lose weight, sometimes, not every time, but sometimes, is because of changes in diet and lifestyle generally. Let's use back pain as an example. The reason people see improvements in back pain when they lose weight isn't because of the actual weight loss, it's because of changes in diet usually, or changes in the kind of lifestyle they're living. It's the reason that a lot of people's health actually can improve when they gain weight. It's all about your lifestyle and how you're living and if you're living a healthy life, which has very little to do with weight.
Back pain could also be caused by excess weight pressing down on their spinal column, or the general stress on your spine it takes to carry excess weight around all day. But she continues to clarify in her next video.
To this because this is a perfect example of how deep-rooted fat phobia is actually really dangerous for fat people in our society because it affects medical practitioners and affects the information that they tell fat people.
She said, fat phobia is dangerous because it affects how medical professionals deal with fat people. Well, I don't think doctors should be any less kind or helpful to their fat patients, implying that medical professionals should just not consider obesity a problem is kinda insane. Obesity is a major health risk, so of course it affects how they interact with fat people. Telling fat people that their joint pain or back pain or other problems may be caused by excess weight is not fat phobic.
And how they treat fat people. Back pain actually has no correlation whatsoever with the amount of weight you're carrying. There's very, very little information on studies around what causes back pain, and it could me Google it. I don't feel like putting up a bunch of information for y'all right now, but like Google is free, so.
Back pain is something that is actually studied. The problem is that back pain can be caused by nerves, bones, tumors, misalignment, and many other factors. Some of which can be caused or exacerbated by excess body weight. The first thing I found when I Googled back pain and obesity was the study that lists multiple conditions that link back pain and obesity. And thanks for reminding me that this information is only a quick Google search away.